Thanks for joining another episode of Breaking Nashville, our website, breakingnashvillepodcast.com. And we're on Twitter. It's at Breaking Nash. And always give us a like on Facebook, please. We're judged heavily on that. My name is Jon Walkins. I'm on Twitter as well. It's at Jon Walkins Host, and Dean Alexander is with us. We should say more than anything, dealing with some nasal issues right off the bat, right?
Well, I got a little bit of a little cold issue, some allergy issues. I always had this theory about Nashville. It's kind of funny about how music or the songwriters and singers down there, they all sing through their nose. Well, I think it's because you really don't have a choice a couple times a year.
The allergies are forcing it onto you.
Yeah, they force it on you. So I do apologize to the listeners.
Well, I'll tell you, you still sound better than my radio voice, which I've always said I sound like an elf on helium. So
that's awesome.
Hey, 2.5 years ago, our station threw this show. It was Brett Eldridge was headlining, and the Warner rep at the time called and said, "Hey, I got this new guy. Yeah. He doesn't have any music out yet, but his name's Dean Alexander. What do you think of him opening up?" And I said, "Yeah, why not? We need an opener. Bring him out." And you came up on stage, and first of all, I love what you did on stage.
Thank you.
And then we were able to spend some time afterwards together, which was really cool. And then I didn't hear from you for a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a jealous girlfriend, but what happened? like where'd you go?
Well, like I said, that was an introduction to radio, and I was just kind of going around, and I was still trying to figure out who I was, musically and as an artist. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Nashville and started just the whole project of finding who I was and all that kind of good stuff. And finally, we decided to go shoot the documentary, go back home, and to kind of give a background of my life, that to give to radio, to kind of give them a little backstory. And when we went back there, which to let you know, it was the first time I'd been back home in like 13 years, and it was kind of a therapeutic session, if you will. And so when I got back to Nashville, which is maybe about a year ago, I decided to scrap everything I had and start over.
Ballsy.
Well, it turned out for the best, because that's what I needed to do, and that's where I was mentally and spiritually. I think that whole trip not only saved that part of me, the mentally and spiritual part of me, it actually saved my career. I think is I came up with some new material. I had just a new energy towards life, and so that's where it all started.
Who decides to go back and do the documentary? Was that something you said, "Hey, I need the fundage for this. Yeah. This is important to me"?
Well, we all kind of sat around the table, with the whole staff of Warner, and we were discussing how to approach this, because they knew it was kind of a very sensitive, sensitive thing. Because I, dealing with my history, losing my parents, and it's like, well, we want you to tell that story, but only you can tell that story, and only you know what you want, what you can get away with, and or feel comfortable with, and we don't want to push it on you. And I was like, well, you know what? Let's. I forget who said it first, but then I was like, well, if we're going back, why don't we go back to the church where I started to play, and then on top of that, why don't we just go back to the bar I was kicked out of?
Yeah.
So if we're going to do it, let's go all the way. Let's give the whole story. And for the longest time, I was kind of ashamed, of where I came from, but that's where. When I owned up to that, and I was okay with it, with my past, and to figured out that it's okay to go through those things, because I'm sure there's people out there that are going through the same stuff right now.
Yeah.
That's when my music took a turn, and when I was calm within myself, knowing where I came from, and proud of it. It took to get to that point. My grandfather. When I moved in with my grandfather, he's a pastor and of this church, and he did not like country music. He did not like rock and roll. He didn't want none of that stuff in the house. So, and my parents were totally cool with this, but when they died, they had to take over. So,
right.
what I would do, I figured out when I was about 15, 16 years old that I could sneak out the window and put my amp out, my guitar out, and I could get away with that, you know, because they were in bed, they were old, they were asleep.
Yeah.
So I used to sneak 2 doors down to this bar, and I'd play. You know, I'd learn songs, and I'd just get up there and just noodle around, and I'd crawl back through the window, and nobody knew anything. Well, finally, I did that for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, and I was 17 years old, and apparently I had my amp up a little bit too loud, and my grandfather couldn't sleep that night, and he heard me and walked in, busted me.
Man.
So,
and you tell the story on your video that he walked in and you saw him right away when he walked through the door.
It was like when like a cartoon or a movie when the record stops.
Yeah.
Everybody's put their drinks down. Everybody knew who my grandfather was.
Right.
And I forgot to tell you this. He walked in with a hammer. Yeah. So we're talking a Kentucky hillbilly, just ready to pull his grandson out of there. And all I remember is my boots and the sound of my amp being unplugged, and that's all I remember is just walking to that door.
Yeah.
And of course, when I got to the door, he said, get your stuff, get out. And that started my music career right there.
And shortly after, you ended up in Nashville.
Yeah, about 3 years after that, kind of gypsied around, rambled around for a few years, and moved to Nashville and did the whole sleeping in my car thing for a few weeks until I found out, because I didn't know anybody there.
Yeah.
So I did that until I found a job working at Gibson, and I figured out that Gibson wasn't okay. I love them to death, but just like any business, they're not okay with you taking days off work to go write songs.
They're not cool with that, huh?
So I had to quit, before they fired me.
Yeah.
And I was still playing. I was playing down at the honky tonks and did that for like 5 years. And finally, I took up a landscaping job, and I was actually shoveling manure on. It's such a pretty story.
Yeah.
Shoveling manure on this lady's flowers, and she walks out and she sees them in tight jeans and boots, and she comes up to me and asks me what I do. And long story short, it turned out to be Barbara Orbison.
So you had no clue when you started?
I had no idea who it was.
Huh.
Yeah. Barbara Orbison is the late, widow to Roy. Right.
Yeah.
That started my whole first publishing. I got my first publishing deal.
So she owned some publishing rights.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she was. I think she was publishing Taylor Swift at that time. Not publishing Taylor Swift. She had a lot of songs in that catalog from Taylor, I think.
So what happens when you show up and Barbara goes, "Hey, I want to sign you to this publishing deal." Does that change everything? Are you done doing the landscaping? Are you now a full-time songwriter?
Not necessarily. I mean, because sometimes they don't pay that well if you're the first time. Okay. I mean, because you're still, they'll give you like $18,000-$19,000, and then you still have to go pick up a second job, which I did. I went on the road and started playing some side guy work and wherever I could find, and still trying to figure out who I was in between then. But no, not necessarily all the time does that work like that. My second publishing deal kind of worked like that. It gave me a room to really take off. But it's still, it eases up a lot of stress, financial stress, even with $18,000, $19,000.
Did you know you wanted to be a performer more than a songwriter? I know they go hand in hand.
They do go hand in hand. I never thought about. I never separated them. I never. It's like do you think of lyrics before melody? And I feel like all the time it always comes at once. Sometimes maybe I don't know. It can have its times. But Live a Little, my single.
Yeah.
It all came at once. It was just one of those things. But I never really separated any of that. I always thought it was all in one.
Then how long did it take from when you signed your first publishing deal to where you actually were able to become a professional player and signed by Warner?
Right. That was probably about 2.5 years.
Okay.
After my deal with Barbara, I was writing for a company named Stage 3, and this guy named Tim Hunzy was in there, and